Welcome to Analysis. I'm John Rees. Now, Sir Mark Rowley, the head of the Metropolitan Police, has waded into another controversy over the policing of the Palestine marches. This time, the Met boss has suggested that police in London should be given the same powers as their counterparts in Northern Ireland to deal with protests. While admitting that Parliament would have to alter the law for that to happen, the very fact that a figure as respected in the political establishment as the police commissioner has raised this prospect makes it an ongoing part of political debate. I recorded this report earlier. The head of the Metropolitan Police says that Palestine protests could be dealt with using bans and prescriptions that are routinely used in Northern Ireland. Sir Mark Rowley has given an interview to the Sunday Telegraph in which he suggests that there are alternatives to the current permissive attitude that he alleges Parliament now takes to Palestine protests. He says that Northern Ireland provides an alternative for policing protest. The Commissioner for the Metropolitan Police told the right-leaning broadsheet that the Northern Ireland Parades Commission, an arm's-length government body which imposes conditions on demos, like the requirement to give 28 days' notice before a protest takes place, could be an alternative model for Palestine demos in London. The Parades Commission was set up in 1998 as a government response to the highly polarised situation in Northern Ireland in the wake of the IRA's armed struggle against the British state. In particular, it was a response to violence that flared after a march by the Loyalist Orange Order from Portadown to Drumcree, seen here. All 7 members of the Parades Commission are appointed by the Secretary of State for Northern Ireland. Disobeying Parade Commission restrictions or bans can result in a 6-month jail sentence. Palestine March organiser Lindsay German of the Stop the War Coalition responded to Rowley's interview by saying that the plan was mad, bad and impossible to implement. She said that the situation in Northern Ireland had nothing in common with that in London. The plan was a further attempt to criminalise protest and to strip ordinary working people of their democratic rights. There is no way that protesters would accept this, and it would lead to a complete breakdown of relations with the Met. We have organised over 20 of the largest marches in British history, German continued, and all of them have been overwhelmingly peaceful, as even the Met have admitted. So the kind of measures that Mark Rowley is floating are totally unnecessary. The Metropolitan Police have been under pressure to crack down even harder on Palestine protests by far-right political figures, including the disgraced former Home Secretary Suella Braverman and fascist poster boy Tommy Robinson. In August this year, Mark Rowley was caught on camera grabbing a Sky journalist's mic and throwing it to the ground after being asked if the Met would end two-tier policing. He has always refused requests from the Palestine protest organisers for a meeting to discuss the policing of demonstrations. So is Sir Mark Rowley simply adding to the propaganda against the Palestine marches, seeking to bolster the repeated accusations from the right-wing press and politicians that they are hate marches? Or is he trying to deflect criticism of the Met by throwing the ball back into the lap of MPs? Would any such plan be workable? Would the protesters cooperate with the police if new laws were brought in? And what would a Northern Ireland type arrangement mean for civil liberties? Well, joining me to discuss all this is Chris Nineham, Chief Steward of the Stop the War Coalition. Well, welcome to the programme, Chris. First of all, let's examine the contention that Sir Mark Rowley made in that Sunday Telegraph article, that the current atmosphere around the demonstrations is permissive. Has that been your experience?
Well, I mean, the idea that Parliament is permissive towards the Palestine demonstrations is a joke, really, because what we've seen from the very beginning of the campaign a year ago is serial attempts to limit our rights to protest, to box us in terms of where we're able to go, where we're able to march, an unprecedented use of restriction orders on us, various different attempts in Parliament itself to argue for more limits on protesting for more legislation, and of course, a kind of establishment-wide campaign back in November last year to try and have our demonstrations banned. My experience of this campaign, and I was involved in the Iraq War campaign. I've been involved in organising many, many protests over the years. Is that we have never faced, no movement has faced such a kind of repressive response from politicians, from the media, and from the police themselves. So, I mean, he's kind of coming at this from a very, very strange angle. And I have to say as well, I mean, we've been complaining since the beginning of the campaign as well about what we regard as political policing in particular. I mean, clearly the police are under a lot of pressure from the politicians, but we believe their response has been discriminatory, has been hostile, has been politicized. And, this intervention kind of just reinforces that impression. I mean, this is clearly aimed at the Palestine protest. Why should the commissioner of the Metropolitan Police volunteer an opinion on our rights to protest? It's a political intervention which just reinforces the sense that they really don't want us to be on the streets at all.
Do you think that, as you say, this political intervention is aimed, as well as being aimed at the protesters themselves, it's aimed at Sir Mark Rowley's critics on the political right? After all, it is an interview in the Sunday Telegraph. Pretty much the only people reading that are going to be the political right. Is he really saying to these people, look, if you don't like what we're doing, that's up to you. Give us more powers and we'll do it differently?
Yeah, I mean, you can interpret this as kind of, in a certain sense, a way of calling the bluff of the right. That would be one way of looking at it. But I'm afraid that from our experience, although, as I say, there clearly is a lot of political pressure on the police, it's also true that there has been this kind of, from the very beginning, there has been a sense of that they really would prefer it if we didn't march at all, and that they themselves as an institution are not particularly sympathetic to our particular rights to protest. And one kind of indication of that is the fact that we have, as I think you mentioned, we have been asking for a meeting with Sir Mark Rowley since autumn last year, and we've been just knocked back time after time. Whereas we know for a fact that he has been meeting various other interested parties, he won't at the moment have a meeting with the people who actually organise the protests. So, I really don't buy the idea that that this is simply a kind of manoeuvre. I think there is an underlying hostility to us, and there have been loads of arrests. And although the marches have been overwhelmingly peaceful, you do kind of get the impression on the marches that the police want to get a few arrests as a way of demonising us. And anyone who thinks that I'm exaggerating should take a look at the police's Twitter feed, the Metropolitan Police's Twitter feed after the demos, or even sometimes in the run-up to the demos as well, where there's definitely a sense that that there's an attempt to kind of criminalise and to demonise the pro-Palestine movement coming from the Metropolitan Police themselves. So I think this is a very unwarranted intervention. I also find it, I have to say, I find it quite alarming, really, because, as you say, if Sir Mark Rowley's proposing this move, that actually gives it some legs politically. And really, if we did go there, it would be absolute chaos.
Do you think the police have already arrived in practice at the situation that Sir Mark Rowley claims is peculiar to Northern Ireland? I mean, all right, we don't have a parades commission. That's the government-appointed body that decides these matters. But what they're deciding, that demonstrators have to give 28 days notice, that they can ban individuals from going on demonstrations, that they can prescribe the route of demonstrations, the timing of demonstrations. Well, the police are attempting at least to do all of that, or pretty much all of that, in London already.
Yeah, I mean, I think that is worryingly, that is their aspiration. Um,
But isn't it
and
the reality? Isn't that what the orders that they impose on the demonstrations already are?
I mean, it is and it isn't, to be honest. I definitely think that the orders that they are imposing, which, as I say, they've done in an unprecedented way. They've not done it to trade union marches. They've not done it to anti-austerity marches. This is a definite kind of a unique operation against the Palestine movement. And I definitely think they want to get to the point where, we march when and where they want us to. The only thing I would say is that despite the use of orders and despite, I think, there being at least elements within the police who would like to go in that direction, they haven't been able to because we have refused to comply in the sense that a number of times, including most notably November the 11th last year, when they've said to us, don't do this or we're going to ban you, which is what they did say, we've defied them. And a number of times since then, they've tried to say we can't march to Hyde Park, we can't march to Whitehall, we can't march to the Israeli embassy. And we've said, well, I'm afraid we're not going to accept that. And because this is such a big movement, and it's such a united movement, and it's such a passionate and committed movement, they've had to, in each case, they've had to actually back down, sometimes, as you know, right at the last moment. Now, that doesn't mean that it's not very worrying that they are trying to create these restrictions and to change the way demonstrations are dealt with in this country at the moment. But nevertheless, so far we've been able to push them back, and I'm fairly confident we'll be able to push them back if they go any further with this particular proposal. But we shouldn't be here. We shouldn't be in this situation. This country is supposed to have a record of free speech and free protest second to none. That tradition, those traditions of popular right and popular freedoms are seriously under attack at the moment. And here, unfortunately, we see the head of the Metropolitan Police leading the charge.
Is it the case, really, that what's happening with the demonstrations in London, and has happened over the course of the last year, is, although you've quite rightly pointed out a number of occasions on which the police have tried to go further than this, and which the protesters have pushed back against it, but as a kind of general operating procedure, is really the demonstrators tell the police what they want to do. The police then argue the toss over that. Precisely whether or not that will happen. And then when it's going to happen, the police kind of put in place orders which kind of more or less mirror what they've been told the protesters are going to do anyway. So there's a level of sort of performative behaviour by the police for their right-wing critics, but really the initiative rests with the protesters at the moment. I guess what Sir Mark Rowley would do if the Northern Ireland protocol, so to say, were imposed, would be that the boot would be probably literally on the other foot, that the police would be issuing the orders and the protesters would be having at best to accommodate to them or not to march.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, I think there is an element of it at the moment of a kind of game being played around the arrangements for the demonstrations. But having said that, having accepted that, I also do think we need to be clear that there have been various moments when the police have definitely, in a concerted way, tried to actually change the kind of balance of forces, change the procedure in the direction of the one that you're suggesting. And those are the moments when they've said, no, you can't do this. They've said publicly, they've actually threatened organisers with arrest, as they did in the demonstration before last, when they said we were not allowed to set off till 2:30 for reasons they didn't explain to us. That meant they would have had to kettle us for 2.5 hours. That was a genuine, in my opinion, a kind of, power play on their part. And we did push it back. So yeah, there's an element of game playing, but there's also a real struggle um, for um, for kind of control and for access to various parts of London that so far we have won. Maybe partly this move by Sir Mark Rowley, which comes in a way a bit out of the blue, maybe partly it is a response to the perception that that we have so far won the various different kind of battles in the run up to the demonstrations. So yeah, I think he is trying to. This is an attempt. He's at least flying the kite here for a different kind of approach, which would be absolutely disastrous. And there's also the kind of, when he talks about the situation in Northern Ireland, I mean, it's such a different political situation there. And one of the things I think is going on here is that, and this has been something that other senior police people have talked to us about, have suggested to us before, is that there's an analogy being made between the situation in Ireland and the situation in Britain, as if the community, as they put it, is polarized and divided on the question that we're marching on, in a similar way to that which it is to the way communities are divided in the north of Ireland. Now, that seems to me to be a completely false analogy, because the reality of the situation is the overwhelming majority of people in all communities in Britain are for a ceasefire and are against what our government is doing and the support our government is giving to Israel. So this whole talk about divided communities and a polarized society is a kind of smokescreen which is being used to attempt to introduce quite draconian measures.
And the timing perhaps is interesting as well for this interview with the Sunday Telegraph, because we've just had what I think in the political establishment, at any rate, was quite a shocking result in the Tory leadership contest, where the two final candidates, one of which will become leader of the Tory party, are two extreme right wingers. So do you think there's a possibility? I mean, the Met is a highly politicised, highly politically sensitive institution. Do you think there's a sense in which Mark Rowley is getting his argument in first before figures arrive on the political scene who are very, very likely to reinforce the whole argument about the Palestine marches being hate marches, how they ought to be banned and so forth and so on?
Yeah, I think that's no doubt a contributing factor. And of course, it's reinforced by the fact that the Labour Party is taking a similar line to the right of the Labour Party in terms of the right of the Tory Party in terms of their attitude to not just the Palestine issue in general, but their attitude to the right to protest. So I suspect that is one element of what is going on here. I think there's another element, just a more general a part of this, which is that the establishment as a whole has a big problem around this issue and around these protests, and there must be a problem that they continue to grapple with, because actually, whatever the manoeuvring and the positioning inside the political elites, the truth of the matter is that those people in the establishment, and it's probably the majority of the establishment, who do support broadly what Starmer is doing, who do believe we should continue to support Israel in the midst of this genocide, they are more and more isolated. And, I think in a way that's the fundamental reason why there's been this campaign of demonization and criminalization against the movement, is because they are isolated and they're worried. And the popular opinion polls are actually moving gradually against them, and have been moving against them by and large, with a few twists and turns since last October. And so, given that, they're losing the political argument, they're losing the battle of minds, the battle of ideas in society. And in those circumstances, this tends to be what embattled elites do. They move towards repression, and they move towards measures to try and intimidate people from demonstrating. I don't think, by the way, that it's going to work. I think that the experience of last year, where they tried to ban the November the 11th march, shows that actually this kind of these kind of moves just encourage the protesters or lead to further protest and more participation. And the biggest demonstration we've had in the whole year has been the demonstration they tried to ban on November the 11th, and I don't think that's an accident.
Chris, last question. If such measures were brought in, if the law was altered, as Mark Rowley has said that it would have to be, if there were the equivalent of a parades commission appointed in this country, would protest organisations refuse to work with it?
Well, I mean, I'm not in a position to speak for everyone, but I have to say that I think it's an idea that really would be laughed out of court by the certainly the organisers of the Palestine demonstrations, because it would be such a clear attack on our right to continue this campaign, and I think everyone probably in the movement would agree that it is just based on a false premise. It's based on this idea that is, in a way, the kind of central plank, or one of the key planks in the operation against us, which is to try and imply that these demonstrations are essentially Muslim demonstrations. They're demonstrations of Palestinians and Arabs and so forth demonstrating, while the Jewish community and most of the rest of society is against us and is in favour of what Israel is doing. Well, that is just a fiction. It's a delusion that is being propagated by those few people in society who do support the genocide. The fact of the matter is, as I say, they are isolated. And people talk about the Jewish community. Just to finish on, the Jewish community, insofar as it exists, is divided. There are hundreds, thousands of Jewish people on our demonstration. Our last demonstration was addressed by a Holocaust survivor, a Jewish Holocaust survivor. The fact of the matter is that every community, the vast majority in most communities in this country are absolutely for a ceasefire.
Okay, we're going to have to leave it there, Chris. Thanks very much for joining us. My thanks there to Chris Nineham, Chief Steward from the Stop the War Coalition. That brings us to the end of analysis for today, but do rejoin us. We'll be keeping a careful eye on your civil liberties and the right to protest in future editions. But for tonight, thanks for watching.